Today, let's continue looking into the lead poisoning case involving children at a kindergarten in Tianshui, Gansu. 2 days ago, the local joint investigation team released an official report. According to the statement, the children got poisoned because the kitchen staff at Patient Kindergarten bought colored pigment online and used it to make corn sausages and tricolored date cakes for the kids. After eating those, the kids were exposed to lead and got sick. But after this report came out, many people online weren't convinced. They felt there were too many suspicious points. First of all, they noted that these pigments sold online are not cheap. In fact, edible food coloring is actually cheaper. So, if the kitchen staff's motivation was to save money, wouldn't they have chosen the cheaper food-grade coloring instead? Why spend more on non-edible pigments? It just doesn't add up. Second, tests now show that even the kindergarten teachers have high levels of lead in their blood, around 400 to 500 micrograms, which is very serious. If the kitchen knowingly used toxic pigments in food, why would the staff eat it too? It doesn't make sense that they'd poison themselves. So now it looks more like they didn't know at all, and the real source of the contamination came from somewhere else, something that affected both the staff and the kids at the same time. That's when people started looking into the surrounding area. It turns out that just 2 to 3 kilometers from the kindergarten, there's a lead zinc ore transfer station. That's where mined ore is brought in and stored before being loaded onto trucks and shipped out. It's possible that the station polluted the groundwater or surface water in the area. If that's the case, it could easily explain how the kids were exposed. And here's the thing. People also dug up past incidents. Apparently, over a decade ago, Tianshui's Maiji district had a similar problem. A local lead zinc factory polluted the surface water in a nearby village so badly that the water turned black. Children there got sick with the same symptoms: stomach pain, diarrhea, just like this time. At the time, local hospitals said the test results were fine. But some parents didn't trust that and took their kids to Xi'an for testing. Sure enough, the results showed lead levels way above the limit. Sound familiar? That's exactly what's happening now. Local tests say everything is normal, but when the kids are tested in Xi'an, their lead levels are off the charts. It's almost the same playbook. That's why a lot of people now suspect that the local government is using the kindergarten staff and kitchen workers as scapegoats. They arrested them. But maybe the real cause of the lead poisoning is the nearby ore transfer station or another polluting company. And if that's true, then this issue goes way beyond one kindergarten. It could affect a lot more people. To protect the company, the local government might be covering things up. After reading through all the online analysis, I think this kind of public reaction is pretty understandable. The way the local government handled the whole situation has been questionable. They released a statement on July 3rd and another on July 8th. But both were vague and lacking in detail. The first one was just 3 short sentences. The second one was a bit longer, but even then, it failed to explain some of the most crucial points. For example, they never said exactly what kind of pigment was used. They didn't say when it was bought or how much was used. Without these details, people can't get a clear picture of what really happened. From my years of experience as an investigative journalist, I've learned that when the government puts out reports during incidents like this, there are usually 2 key characteristics. First, the information they release is generally true. They don't tend to make things up or lie outright. It's unlikely someone's sitting there fabricating false information to deliberately deceive the public. But second, and this is important, they never tell you everything they know. They often leave out parts of the story, and sometimes the parts they do share, while technically true, can actually mislead people. When they only reveal a certain slice of the truth, it can point the public in the wrong direction. That's a common pattern in how official statements are handled in China. So whenever I analyze a report like this, I stick to 2 principles. I basically trust the main facts they present, but I pay extra attention to what's missing. The information they avoid mentioning, or deliberately choose not to tell you, is usually what deserves the most scrutiny. Now, before diving into what this particular report might be hiding, I want to explain why I personally don't believe this lead poisoning incident was caused by that ore transfer station. The reason is simple. It doesn't fit the typical pattern of industrial pollution. Usually, when a factory causes contamination, there's a clear center point, and the pollution spreads outward. The closer you are to the source, the more severe the exposure. The farther you are, the less serious it is. This kindergarten is 2 or 3 kilometers away from the lead zinc ore station. If those kids are showing significant lead levels at that distance, then people living much closer to the station should be even worse off. Their symptoms should be more severe, their blood lead levels even higher. But up until now, we haven't seen any reports of other victims outside of patient kindergarten. Some might ask, what if the other victims just haven't been revealed? But based on what I've seen, that's unlikely. After this incident was exposed, local residents were extremely worried. Many parents rushed to get their children tested, not just the ones from patient, but others too. For example, one parent had 2 kids. One attended patient, the other didn't. The parent took both children for blood tests. The one from patient had high lead levels, but the other one was totally normal. The adults in the family also got tested. Again, nothing abnormal. And it's not just patient kindergarten. The same owner runs other kindergartens nearby, like Waibei Kindergarten, which is only about 1 kilometer away. None of the kids there tested positive for lead exposure. So what we're seeing is a very specific, isolated cluster. Only the children at patient were affected. That's not how factory pollution usually works. If this were caused by the ore transfer station, we'd expect to see a much wider impact in the surrounding area, especially closer to the source. That's why I believe this case doesn't match the pattern of lead poisoning caused by industrial pollution. Secondly, do you remember what we talked about in the last episode? The blood lead levels in these children are extremely high. The highest reached 528, and most were between 200 and 400 micrograms per liter. How serious is that? When the doctors in Xi'an saw these numbers, they were shocked. They said they'd rarely seen such high lead levels before. Normally, even factory-related pollution doesn't result in this kind of concentration. Let me explain. If you're a worker operating in a lead zinc processing plant for a whole year without any protection, your blood lead level still likely wouldn't exceed 400. But now, we have kids living far from any industrial site with levels over 500. That's extraordinary. Take someone working in an administrative building at a factory, about 100 meters away from the workshop. After a full year of unprotected exposure, their blood lead level likely wouldn't exceed 100. Now think about this kindergarten. It's located 2 to 3 kilometers from the ore transfer site. Even if that site was polluting, it wouldn't cause such high exposure. The only explanation for such elevated levels is that the children consumed a large dose of lead in a short period of time, most likely by eating something heavily contaminated. There's really no other possibility. Industrial pollution just doesn't produce such high lead levels this quickly. That's the second point. Third, let's talk about what the local government actually did. They arrested 8 people, including the kindergarten principal and one of the investors, and charged them with producing toxic and harmful food. They've already filed criminal cases. But notice, no one from the factory has been detained. If the lead had come from pollution caused by the factory owner would have violated criminal law too. So some people are saying that the government is trying to protect the factory owner. But in my view, that's unlikely. No government official would willingly take the risk of protecting someone responsible for a crime as serious as child poisoning. If there was solid evidence that the factory caused the lead exposure, the owner would have been arrested already. Instead, they arrested people from the kindergarten. If those people are innocent and this turns out to be a mistake, the truth will eventually come out. They won't be sentenced to death, and once they're released, the facts will become public. So the fact that law enforcement has filed formal charges and put these people under criminal detention suggests that they found strong evidence. That's why I believe the overall conclusion in the official report is likely correct. Someone in the kindergarten's kitchen bought pigment online, used it in food, and that led to the poisoning. The root cause of the children's lead exposure is probably just that. But that brings us to the next question. What exactly is the government not telling us in this report? That's what we need to look into. And the parts they're deliberately leaving out might be the most alarming. First, I believe the local authorities are hiding the actual time they became aware of the incident. According to the official report, on July 1st at 6:52 p.m., the Market Supervision Bureau and the local police received a call from the public reporting that several children at Peishin Kindergarten had abnormal blood lead levels. It says the 2 departments immediately launched an investigation. That sentence gives the impression that 6:52 p.m. on July 1st was the very first time the government learned that something had gone wrong at the kindergarten. But I want to be very clear, that's not true. Sure, it's possible that someone made a call at that time. But that was definitely not the first time the authorities found out about the situation. So why do I say that? Let me explain. On the afternoon of July 2nd, there was already a meeting with the children's parents where officials told them everything was fine. But in the morning of July 2nd, children were already being gathered at Peishan Kindergarten to have their blood drawn. So let's think about this. They collected blood in the morning, and by the afternoon, they already had the results. That seems unlikely, doesn't it? Especially considering we're talking about hundreds of kids. In total, they collected 223 samples for testing. These samples came from 4 kindergartens: Waibei, Chiai, Mengdi, and Peishan. The samples weren't just from food. They included leftover food, raw ingredients, utensils, drinking water, children's items, teaching tools, and even outdoor soil samples. Now imagine this. The official report says the government received the first report at 6:52 p.m. on July 1st. Then by July 2nd, they were already notifying parents of the results. That doesn't add up. How long do you think it takes to collect 223 samples across 4 different kindergartens, send them off for testing, analyze them, and come to a conclusion, especially when the final report says only 2 food samples were found to be problematic? Can that really all happen in less than 24 hours? I don't think so. Also on July 2nd, the Provincial Health Commission sent 6 experts to Tianshui, specialists in toxicology, critical care, pediatrics, and more. Think about that. If the province is sending in a team of specialists in poisoning and pediatric emergencies, that tells us something serious had already been confirmed within the system. And how long does it take to determine that this is a serious case of pediatric lead poisoning? From experience, I'd say it takes at least a week or 2. There's another key detail. Some parents recall that on the night of July 1st, kindergarten teachers, some of whom had their own children enrolled at Peishan, already knew their kids had tested positive for lead. Not only that, but their samples had already been sent for further confirmation at the provincial level. How long does that process usually take? Again, at least a week. So based on all this, I believe the local authorities actually knew about the incident at least 1 to 2 weeks earlier than the time they officially claim. What really happened on the night of July 1st was that the authorities confirmed Peishan Kindergarten as the source of the poisoning. That's when the Health Bureau, the 2nd Municipal Hospital, and even the State Security Bureau all showed up at the scene. Would that kind of high-level response really be triggered by one ordinary phone call from a concerned citizen? Unlikely. Then, early in the morning on July 2nd, all the children were called in for blood tests. You think they could organize testing for hundreds of kids overnight just because of one call the night before? No way. This kind of swift, large-scale action clearly shows that by the night of July 1st, the government had already identified the source of contamination and locked in Peishan Kindergarten as ground zero for the lead poisoning. So it's reasonable to believe the government actually knew about this incident at least 2 weeks earlier than they claimed. As I said before, the kids had been feeling unwell since March, right after the new semester started. Most parents didn't know what was going on. But by May and June, some started taking their kids to the hospital. A few were diagnosed with lead poisoning, though the cause wasn't clear. Later, bits of this information reached local authorities. The government began quietly investigating, probably first checking if it was factory-related. After weeks of looking into it, they eventually narrowed it down. On July 1st, they locked onto Peishan Kindergarten as the source. And that night, officials went in and began a full inspection. So why did they hide the truth about when they found out? Because they didn't want people to know they had delayed action. Think about it. If they claim they got the first report at 6:52 p.m. on July 1st and organized testing the very next morning, it makes them look quick and responsible. But in reality, they'd likely known for weeks and still didn't warn parents. They didn't act in time. That's the first big thing they're covering up, the real timeline. The second is the pigment itself. They said it was colored pigment, but didn't say what kind. People pointed out that industrial pigment is more expensive than edible food coloring. If the motive was saving money, why not use the cheaper legal option? Why buy something dangerous that costs more? It doesn't add up. That's why many people believe there's something the government isn't saying, and the vague explanation only makes it more suspicious.
第一呢，就是食用色素柠檬黄的价格一定高于工业用途的染料涂料，它的规格只有10到12毫升，综合价格算下来约等于100块钱。
I saw someone online, many of you probably know him, Xin Jifei. He's known for exposing food additives and shady industry practices. After this lead poisoning news broke, Xin Jifei used his expertise to analyze the case. Based on his knowledge, he suspected that the kitchen worker had bought a substance called tartrazine.
这是我买的500克散装啊，8块4毛4包邮。这个包装特别有迷惑性，写的柠檬黄，好多人不知道它不是食品色素的柠檬黄。包装写的柠檬黄，多误导人，多误导人！柠檬黄是食用色素，你这个上面也没写用途，不是每个人都那么了解政策法规。这一袋1斤的工业涂料，柠檬各黄有半斤以上的铅。你以为我以前拿这个拍视频我夸张吗？
This so-called lemon yellow contains up to 50% lead.
还有的网友评论，原料中的铅含量只有80毫克每公斤，这个说法是不对的，因为柠檬各黄的铅含量要超过50%。
So he went ahead and fully recreated the process, exactly how the kitchen worker at patient kindergarten might have used tartrazine to make those toxic foods. You can check out the video for yourself. Personally, I think the video is quite convincing. If you paid attention to the official report, it mentioned that 2 of the food samples had extremely high levels of lead. How high? One had 1,052 milligrams. The other had 1,340 milligrams. To put it simply, 1,052 milligrams means there was over 1 gram of lead in every kilogram of food. That's a poisoning level dose. Regular food colorings don't contain anywhere near that amount of lead. 还有很多网友关注的是公告中的3色发糕玉米长角铅的含量是1000毫克每公斤以上。大家也看监控视频了，这个幼儿园的食堂呢，它是徒手倒的，根本就没有称重，所以呢，它铅的含量数值是不一样的。那1000毫克实际就是1克。我们昨天做的产品，如果说是500克的面粉放1%，这个1000毫克铅含量的数值就可以满足。But tartrazine, or what was referred to in this case, is actually chemically known as lead chromate. And lead chromate contains up to 50% lead. If you mix even a small amount of it into flour, it's enough to reach the levels found in those food samples. That's why I think Xin Jifei's theory is actually very convincing. And if you watched his video, you'd notice, after he mixed it in and made the food, the final product didn't have any strange smell either. 为什么加了柠檬各黄吃不出来不好的味道？我想它大概率加了复配的甜味剂和香精。甜味剂呢，它是化学合成的代糖，是不受酵母菌干扰的。发面之后呢，依然还能吃出来甜味儿。再加上香精，很难有人能吃出来不好的味道。有朋友说这个各黄有味道，和完之后的面没有任何异味，它比食用色素可便宜老了。食用色素柠檬黄要30块钱一斤，这个东西只要6到8块钱一斤。Xin Jifei also pointed out something really important. These industrial-grade dyes, like lemon chrome yellow, are sold online without any clear warnings. If you go online and search for lemon yellow or yellow food coloring, both food-grade and industrial-grade versions show up in the results. Some of these industrial dyes are normally used in paints, but they're listed right alongside the food-safe ones. And the industrial-grade lemon chrome yellow is incredibly cheap, just 8 yuan per kilogram. So it's possible the kitchen worker simply searched for yellow coloring, saw this cheap lemon chrome yellow and went with that. She probably told the kindergarten principal and placed the order. Now if you watch the video released by Xinhua, you'll notice something else. In the footage showing the food being prepared for the kids, the pigment was in a bottle. But when you buy lemon chrome yellow online, it usually comes in paper bags. So most likely, after receiving the order, she repackaged it into bottles for convenience. But these bottles didn't have any proper labeling. Even if the original packaging said not for consumption, nobody else at the kindergarten would have known. Which means throughout this whole process, the people in the kitchen were probably adding lemon chrome yellow into the food without realizing it was toxic. The kids ate it, the teachers probably ate it too, maybe even the kitchen worker herself. And that brings up the real question. Why hasn't the government disclosed exactly what this so-called colored pigment is? Because if what Xin Jifei said is correct, and it really was lemon chrome yellow, then we're not just dealing with lead poisoning. Lemon chrome yellow also contains chromium, specifically hexavalent chromium. Now, chromium comes in different forms. Trivalent chromium isn't very harmful, but hexavalent chromium is highly toxic and carcinogenic. If the public finds out that the children weren't just exposed to lead, but possibly also poisoned with a known carcinogen, you can imagine how devastated the parents would be.
我的孩子生下来8斤1两，很健康，各项指标都正常。从上幼儿园到现在一年都没住过。至于他的赔偿什么的，我现在都不想，我只想我要我的孩子健康。
That's why I strongly suspect the government is hiding the name of this chemical compound. because they're afraid the parents might completely break down or even start fighting back desperately if they knew the truth. So I want to say something directly to the families involved in this case. Right now, don't just test your children's blood for lead, you should also test for chromium. Last night, I spoke with a food safety expert in China. He also recommended that parents have their children tested for chromium levels in the blood. Chromium, especially hexavalent chromium, is directly carcinogenic. Its harm is no less serious than lead. And here's another problem. The kids are currently undergoing chelation therapy to remove lead, but during that process, any chromium in their bodies might also be flushed out, meaning the evidence could be lost. So don't assume that the hospitals are fully on your side. A few days ago, I saw a video by a blogger from Xi'an, and he explained something very clearly. After the incident broke, many parents didn't trust the hospitals in Tianshui, so they brought their kids to Xi'an for treatment. At first, the hospitals in Xi'an shared all the data with the parents. They said the situation was very serious, that the lead had reached the bone marrow, causing permanent damage. But then, government officials from Tianshui showed up.
那个啥，稍等一下，
我家的娃已经出现身体不舒服。
领导一会儿接待你可以吧？
接待我，
行吧？你稍微等一下。
你一个接待是全部的家长，不是一个人。
说话要不那个啥呀，我们
这里看的不是你们的孩子，知道吗？还有，
你们让开，不让开，
肯定不是你们的孩子，我的孩子。
让开，稍等一下。
让开，我听不到。让开，我有什么这么打我们？不行，就在这说，我就在这说。
不要拍照。
你管我？
为啥不让拍照？
为啥不让拍啊？为啥不能拍？
为啥不能拍啊？为啥不能拍？给个理由。
They brought a few boxes of milk as gifts and went to talk to the doctors at Xi'an Central Hospital. After that, the doctors' tone changed. They started telling parents that the condition was treatable and tried to reassure them. So I just want to say, parents, please stay alert. Don't fully trust the hospital in Xi'an either.
现在天水市第二人民医院几乎没有任何人，所有的铅中毒的患儿全部在西安市中心医院北院区职业病科的2、3、4、5、6楼。那么最新的消息是，2、3、4、5、6楼呢，楼层不互通，家属和患儿没有办法串走。另外呢，他们组建了一个群，这个群里边谈论最多的就是目前政府应该给他们怎么样操作。第三个信息是什么？家长全部都是自费，有的人呢在附近住宾馆。
Right now, over 100 of these children are being treated at Xi'an Central Hospital. According to some independent bloggers, the hospital has restricted communication between floors. Parents on different levels aren't allowed to interact, possibly to prevent them from talking or organizing together. I saw that one parent even took their child to Shanghai for treatment. Personally, I think if your financial situation allows, you don't have to stay in Xi'an. You can take your child to places like Shanghai or Beijing. The medical resources there are better, and those hospitals are less likely to be influenced by local interests. And most importantly, wherever you go, don't just test for lead. Make sure your child's blood is tested for chromium too. Don't risk your child's long-term health because something critical was missed. This is exactly what I've been saying. The vagueness of the official report hides potentially much more serious health risks. The report never mentioned the possibility of chromium exposure. That's the third major point being concealed. Now the fourth. The report said all 250 children at Peishan Kindergarten had been tested. As of 10 p.m. on July 7th, following the principle of test everyone who needs to be tested, treat everyone who needs treatment, results from multiple medical institutions were reviewed by a panel of national and provincial experts. They concluded that 233 children had abnormal lead levels and 18 were normal. It also said that children from Weibai, Chiai and Mengdi kindergartens all tested normal. But one sentence stood out to me, based on the results from multiple medical institutions. Which ones exactly? The truth is, most of the kids only had one round of blood testing on July 2nd, done at Peishan Kindergarten. That afternoon, parents were told the results, and most were told their kids were fine. But no one received official test reports. This made the parents uneasy. So on July 3rd, many of them took their children to Xi'an. And guess what? By the evening of July 3rd, some test results from Xi'an had already come out, showing dangerously high lead levels. More results followed in the days after. But that same night, officials from Tianshui called the parents and said the numbers were low, like 10, 20, maybe 30 micrograms. Parents were furious. The numbers from Tianshui and Xi'an were totally different. So think about it. How many of these children were really tested by multiple institutions? In reality, most were only tested at Peishan, then at Xi'an, which means one thing. the final lead level assessment was based on the data from Xi'an Central Hospital. And that confirms something important. The test results from Tianshui were clearly different from Xi'an's. And not just different, much lower.
西安我们做出来跟天水差了20多倍嘛。然后现在官方通报说我们在201位在2院治疗嘛接受。我们2院你可以现在去2院采访。天水市麦地区2院，你去住院部看有没有人就知道了嘛，对不对？你看现在都在这边住院着。
Why? Why is there such a big difference? A doctor from Xi'an Central Hospital came out and gave an explanation. He said that their hospital uses a method for testing blood lead levels that follows the standards recommended by the World Health Organization.
因为西安市中心医院使用的是石墨炉原子吸收光谱法，该方法被世界卫生组织推荐为血铅检测最准确的方式，对设备精度和操作规范要求极高。而天水官方未明确检测方法，但部分家长反映当地检测使用的是指尖血采样。
They explained that the blood lead test at Xi'an Central Hospital is done using a WHO recommended method. It involves pricking the finger to get a small drop of blood, just a tiny amount. The doctor said that with such a low blood volume, it's not even possible to run their standard test properly. Also, when squeezing the fingertip to get the blood, the lead concentration might actually get diluted. So the test done in Tianshui using fingertip samples could underestimate the actual lead levels by 30% to 50%. But even with that in mind, it still doesn't explain the massive gap. We're not talking about small differences. Some parents were told their child's level was 10 or 20. And then in Xi'an, it turned out to be 300 or 400. That's a difference of 10 to 20 times. In my view, the most likely reason is that Tianshui deliberately hid the real numbers from the parents. To this day, not a single parent from the kindergartens in Tianshui has received a written test report. All results were delivered verbally. Why? Why not give parents the actual report? To me, it's clear. They just wanted to keep the parents calm. That's why so many families decided to take their kids to Xi'an for testing. And honestly, I think they made the right call. Even for those who stayed in Tianshui, some were told their kids' numbers were a bit high. But the hospitals just said, as long as it's under 200, it's fine. Just let the child rest at home. It was even worse for the teachers. Some of them tested at over 400. And yet the local hospitals reportedly told them, if it's under 400, we don't treat it. Only over 400 gets medical attention. So based on all this, you can see how the local authorities are handling this. Whether it's the kids or the teachers, it's clear they're not taking it seriously. That's why these parents chose to go to Xi'an, and they were right to do so. Do you really think the Tianshui city government is putting the children's health first? Of course not. They only care about maintaining stability and keeping the situation quiet. That's the fourth major issue. Now, having laid out the timeline and everything that's happened, I want to say this. This tragedy is the result of multiple layers of failure and ignorance all coming together. On the surface, the kindergarten might look nice. The classrooms look bright. The toys look clean. But the kitchen staff, especially in a place like Tianshui, often have very low levels of education. Years ago, my family hired some housekeepers from that region. Many couldn't even read. They were completely illiterate. So the kitchen workers probably had no idea there was a difference between industrial dye and food-grade colouring. In an interview on CCTV, a local police officer said that the principal wanted to expand enrollment and attract more students. So the kitchen worker went online and bought some colourful pigment. So this kitchen worker probably just went on Pinduoduo and searched for yellow dye. But the problem is, when you search that on Pinduoduo, both food-grade additives and industrial dyes show up in the same results. She probably couldn't tell the difference, so she just picked the cheapest one. And that's where the platform bears huge responsibility. Why do I say that? Because this kind of toxic dye is meant for industrial use, for painting walls, for construction. There should be a qualification system in place. For example, in Japan, if you want to buy a toxic industrial dye, you have to prove you're a certified construction company or contractor. If you're running a kindergarten kitchen and try to buy this stuff, you'd definitely be flagged. Why are you purchasing this? But in China, there's no such verification, no gatekeeping at all. So someone's ignorance directly led to a tragedy. And now, people have tracked down the same seller from whom Xin Jifei bought the dye. Someone asked the seller, "Can this be used in food?" The seller replied, "No, you need to buy food additives if you're using it for cooking." But here's the shocking part. Under that product listing, out of dozens of reviews, at least 3 people said they used this lemon chrome yellow in food. One even posted a picture of using it to make san huangji, 3 yellow chicken. So clearly, using this industrial dye in food isn't a rare case. It's happening in many places. There's absolutely no oversight. Some people are using cheap industrial-grade dyes directly in food processing. I even found a public notice online from April this year. Shanxi's Food Supervision Bureau issued a recall on a batch of tofu skin because the coloring used didn't meet standards. And when I saw that, I immediately thought the non-compliant lemon yellow mentioned in that notice was probably lemon chrome yellow. Why? Because if it were food-grade lemon yellow and someone had simply used too much, there wouldn't be a need for a recall. The safety threshold for food-grade additives is quite high, but with lemon chrome yellow, even a small amount is harmful. It's carcinogenic, and the lead accumulates in the body. That's why it had to be recalled. So you see, this isn't just a one-off case, because platforms don't enforce any kind of separation between food-safe and industrial products. Cases like this are happening more than we think. And that's why I believe these platforms are responsible too. They should clearly separate food additives from industrial dyes in the search results. If you're looking for something to be used in food, you should only see food-safe products. But right now, everything shows up together, side by side, in the same category. Secondly, the platform failed to give any kind of warning. Logically, when you try to buy an industrial-grade dye, there should be a pop-up alert asking, "This product is toxic. What do you plan to use it for?" You should have to answer a few questions. Are you using it for food or for industrial purposes like paint production? And if you say it's for food, then the platform should immediately block the purchase. Only with that kind of system in place can we reduce the risk of major tragedies caused by someone's ignorance or poor judgment. But what do we see now? Even in the government's official report, they don't tell us the name of the compound. And by not telling us, we're left wondering, what role did the platform play in this? What responsibility should it bear? What kind of regulatory changes should follow? We have no idea. Yes, maybe the people who use this toxic substance out of ignorance did break the law. And if they're found guilty, they should be held responsible. But what about the government? If this tragedy doesn't lead to changes in our systems, if all we do is arrest a kitchen worker and a kindergarten principal, can we really say we've learned anything? Can we guarantee something like this won't happen again? Of course not. If the lead poisoning of hundreds of children isn't enough to trigger real change, then what does that say about the role of this tragedy in improving our system? Nothing. And that's the saddest part of all. All right, that's all for today. To all the parents watching this, please don't wait. Get your children fully tested. Check for chromium in their blood, not just lead. Thank you.
这里是此前发生幼儿血铅超标事件的甘肃省天水市麦积区培新幼儿园的门口。那目前可以看到，幼儿园的大门紧闭，不时有办案人员出入现场调查。事发之后，这所幼儿园就提前放了暑假。
家长全部都是自费，有的人呢在附近住宾馆。刚才在直播间你们应该听到了吧？有一个让我最震惊的，就是在天水测的是15.198，结果跑到西安市中心医院，结果一测是300多。还有最后一个患儿的家属给我说，在当地测的是0.1几，在这边是440。我不知道到底谁造假，我也不知道你们这样通报到底是怎么做出来的。难道患儿的家属会说谎吗？就像刚才那个家属所说的，我们现在已经不相信他们了，他们说什么我们都不会回去。从这个通报里面就可以看出端倪。如果你们只是做表面的功夫，希望以堵嘴的方式让这个事件消失在萌芽状态，不好意思，家长不同意，我相信所有的中国人都不会同意。
大家好，我是后实培新幼儿园中一班的倪冠珍。我们今天的晚餐是炒娃娃菜、黄花木耳炒鸡胸肉、肉卷、海底冬瓜汤。大家慢慢享用吧。
颜色又好看又香。别说小孩了，我都想吃一口啊！你说你们这些丧良心的，拿工业涂料给小孩做吃的。咱说这东西你到多少？我没玩过这活，这活太狠了。要那样话，最少是一斤面放了30克呀。我这个机器都不能要了，那回黄了，看着吧。你想那小孩切，快，谁。
到底之前负责任的是有什么目的，有什么隐瞒的？我要住院治疗，他让不让我住院？他不让我住，他让我回2院住。从4号下来做完检测，到7号才给人家老师给出了检查结果，隐瞒了4天不让不出了结果，什么意思啊？给人家西安的医院带不多时间压力，不给结果单子，结果出来518，真的是，还下面的你们这不还干预我们的娃娃。